What if everything the wellness industry is selling you about anxiety? What if none of it is treating the actual problem? I found someone who I think has the answer. He's not a life coach, he's not a podcaster with a supplement line, he's a psychiatrist who tested his theory in the worst possible laboratory: Nazi concentration camps, Auschwitz, Dachau, 3 others, lost his wife there, his parents, his brother, and came out the other side not with trauma as his identity, but with a theory that explains why modern anxiety keeps climbing no matter how many tools we throw at it. Because right now, in 2026, we are the most anxious generation in recorded history, and also the most medicated, the most therapized, the most mindful, the apps, the breathwork, the journaling, the setting boundaries, the whole wellness industrial complex, and the numbers keep going up. So either anxiety is just the human condition now, or we are treating the wrong thing entirely. His name is Viktor Frankl. Viktor, thank you for being here. We treat anxiety today like it's basically a chemical problem, something in the wiring. And there's this whole industry built on managing it, coping tools mostly. You had a pretty different diagnosis. What are we getting wrong?
We are getting the question wrong. We ask, how do I stop feeling this? But anxiety, at its deepest, it is not a malfunction. It is a message. And the message is not something is broken in your chemistry. The message is your life does not yet have a sufficient answer to the question of why it should continue. I call this the existential vacuum, an inner emptiness, not sadness exactly, not depression in the clinical sense, something more like hollowness, the feeling of going through motions that have no particular reason behind them.
The Sunday Neurosis.
Yes, you know this feeling. The week is full. You are busy, productive, stimulated. Then it stops, Sunday afternoon. And there is nothing between you and the question you have been outrunning all week. What is this for? What do people do with that question? They fill the silence, quickly, with anything.
And that's exactly what we do. Open the phone, start the next series, order something. Whatever it takes to not sit in it.
And the void is patient. It waits. I did not have your smartphones, but I described this behavior in the 1950s and 60s. The specific tool changes. What does not change is this. When a human being cannot find meaning, they will find a substitute. And the substitutes, pleasure, distraction, power, even busyness, they do not answer the question. They postpone it.
Okay, so the wellness industry, the breathwork, the journaling, you're saying that's the same thing? Just a more expensive postponement?
I would say this. When a man is wounded and bleeding, you treat the wound first. You clean it. You bandage it. That is the right thing to do. But if the wound does not heal, if it keeps reopening week after week, no matter how carefully you dress it, at some point the question changes. You stop asking how to bandage it better. You start asking, why is this not healing? What is keeping it open? That is where we are with anxiety. The treatments work temporarily. The bleeding slows, and then it comes back. Because we have been dressing the wound without asking what is preventing it from closing. The wellness culture offers in many cases very good bandages. What it does not offer is the diagnosis.
Let's go to your actual theory. Freud said pleasure is what drives us. Adler said power. You came along and said, no, it's meaning. Above both of them. That's a bold move. What makes you so sure?
I do not make this claim as a philosopher in a library. I make it as a man who watched human beings at the absolute limit of what a human being can endure. In the camps, I observed this. The prisoners who held a reason, a person to return to, a work to finish, a testimony to deliver. They bore what could not be borne. Not always, not with certainty, but with a posture that was different. Something remained standing inside them that had not fallen. Those who lost their why, often they did not last the week. Nietzsche wrote it before I lived it. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. I carried that sentence like a coat.
So pleasure and power, Freud and Adler, they're not wrong, they're just
secondary. Think of it this way. Think of a mother who hasn't slept in days. The baby cries, again in the middle of the night, for the 4th time. Every instinct in her body says, stay down, and she gets up anyway. Not because it feels good, not because she has the energy, because there is something that overrides all of that. That something is meaning. Pleasure is the shadow of meaning. When meaning is present, pleasure follows. When meaning is absent, no amount of pleasure satisfies. This is why the successful man who has everything sometimes cannot tell you why he bothers to get up.
That's the successful but empty thing so many people describe. You have the salary, the apartment, maybe even the relationship, and something is still wrong, and you feel almost embarrassed to say so because it looks fine from outside.
Yes, and I want to say to that person, what you feel is not ingratitude. It is not a character defect. It is a signal, the most honest signal your nature can send you. The question is whether you are brave enough to hear it.
Okay, the 3 paths to meaning. You said there are 3. Walk me through them.
The first, you create something. You contribute, work, art, an act of service, something you bring into the world that was not there before. This is the most familiar path. Most people, when they are fortunate, live most of their lives here. The second, you receive something from the world. Beauty, truth, love, a piece of music, a face, a sunset, if you still let yourself look at sunsets. You encounter something outside yourself, and you allow it to matter to you. The third, and this is the one that is misread, is the most irreducible. When suffering comes that cannot be avoided, you choose your attitude toward it, not toward the suffering, toward yourself inside it.
Does that mean suffering is good? That we should want it?
No. Suffering is not necessary for meaning. If you can remove it, remove it. If you can heal, heal. I am a physician. I spent my life trying to relieve suffering. What I said, what I mean, is this. When suffering cannot be removed, the human being is not therefore without a path. The path narrows, but it does not close. The choice of how to face what cannot be changed, that remains. And exercising that choice, that is not passive. It is perhaps the most active thing a person can do. Tragic optimism, not pretending the tragedy is not real, not performing cheerfulness, looking at what is true and refusing to let it be the last word.
We have a generation right now, Gen Z, young millennials, who by historical standards have enormous material comfort, more access to information than any humans have ever had, and the worst mental health numbers we've ever recorded. Rates of anxiety, depression, what researchers are calling deaths of despair. Is this the existential vacuum at scale?
It is precisely what I predicted. In the 1960s, I wrote that the existential vacuum would become one of the defining crises of the century ahead. Not because people would have less, because they would have more, and no framework to make it mean something. For most of human history, meaning was transmitted. You did not invent your purpose, it was handed to you. Religion said, you are part of a story larger than yourself, and your life has a role in it. Community said, here is where you belong, here is what your belonging requires. Tradition said, this is what it means to become an adult, a parent, a person of your people. These structures were imperfect. Many of them deserve to be questioned, but they performed a function that is rarely acknowledged. They relieved the individual of the terrifying burden of inventing meaning alone. Now those structures have been dissolved, and in their place we have given the young something that looks like liberation, but functions like vertigo. Total freedom of self-definition and no ground to stand on.
And the wellness stuff steps in, but it's not filling that gap. It's just making the vertigo more comfortable.
I would ask this generation, and I mean it as a genuine question, not a provocation. What would you build if no one would applaud you for it? What would you endure difficulty for? They are not comfortable questions, but a generation that has never been asked them is a generation in genuine danger. Not because of what threatens them from outside, because of what is absent from inside.
That's going to land hard on a culture that basically elevated "you define your own truth" to a moral principle.
Freedom and arbitrariness are not the same thing. I did not tell my patients what meaning to find. I would not presume. Each person's meaning is specific to them, to their moment, their nature, their life. But I did tell them this: meaning exists. It is real. It is not merely what you feel like deciding it is on a given afternoon. It is something you discover by paying attention, by taking responsibility, by asking the question honestly and staying with it long enough to hear an answer. Rollo May accused me of authoritarianism for this. He was wrong. Teaching a man to be responsible for his own search, that is the opposite of authority. That is respect.
If the person watching this has tried everything, the therapy, the apps, the journaling, all of it, and they still feel like something fundamental is missing, what do you actually say to them?
I say, what you feel is not a malfunction. Do not let anyone tell you it is. It is the most honest thing in you, speaking. The question it is asking is not, how do I feel better? The question is, for what am I living? That question has an answer. It requires honesty and time. When you find it, even partially, even provisionally, the anxiety does not vanish, but it changes. It is no longer the sound of emptiness. It is the friction of a life that is moving towards something. Everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That is enough. It has always been enough.
Viktor Frankl, thank you. I'm going to be honest. I came into this thinking we were going to talk about anxiety. I didn't expect to leave thinking about what I'm building and why. That's on you. Read Man's Search for Meaning. It's short. It's not comfortable. I'm Joshua Whitmore. This is Coffee with Giants. See you next time.